Good afternoon to everyone. On behalf of the IBC for Environment and Climate Change for Europe and Central Asia, I'd like to welcome all participants to today's Green Transition Sustainable Finance webinar organized by the IBC. So today's webinar is the first in a series of 5 green transition webinars organized by the IBC over the next few months in response to the requests of resident coordinators, UN country teams, DCO, and is dedicated to RCOs and UN country teams in Europe and Central Asia. We had a great number of registrants for today's meeting. I hope everybody can join eventually from 15 countries, including multiple RCs and heads of RCOs and results groups. So thank you very much for joining us today, and we look forward to exchanging with you on this important topic. And I want to thank DCO on behalf of the IBC for having facilitated today's webinar. So the idea of the Green Transition Training Program is to further build the country's capacities and strategies and actions for green transition. The content for this webinars and for the other 4 webinars is based on expertise and resources among the IBC members, of which there are 18. The work is led by UNDP, UNECE, UNEP, and UNESCO, and facilitated by ISD with contributions from all the other IBC organizations and external experts. As I said, the Green Transition Training Program will have 5 webinars led by different agencies from September to November. And the main themes identified through various consultations with the RCOs and UNCTs are sustainable finance, energy, plastics, circular economy, and enabling policies and strategic frameworks for green transition at the country level. Now, today's webinar focuses on sustainable finance and is being led by UNEP in coordination with UNDP. And the objective of today's webinar is for participants to better understand sustainable finance, including key concepts, the current state of play, and the main institutions driving the work within the UN system and beyond. And we've also designed the webinars to include Q&A and relevant experience sharing sessions with colleagues across the UN. So without any further ado, I'd like to pass the floor to the colleagues from IISD, Livia Bizivoka and Darren Swanson, to give us an overview of the webinar and get us started. Livia, Darren, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jonathan. My name is Livia Bizikova, and I am a lead at the International Institute for Sustainable Development, IISD, and on behalf of my colleagues, Leslie Pass and Darren Swanson from IISD, we are really excited to take part in this webinar. Part of it is because at IISD, we are also very keen on work on green transition, and part of it is also because it's very exciting to try different ways of online working together with participants on sustainability topics. Which we talk a little bit later about how that work will go together. But as Jonathan mentioned, we will have 5 webinars. 4 of them are more, I would say, kind of issue-oriented topics. So the first one is today, which is the sustainable finance. There will be one on energy, on plastics, on circular economy, likely not in this order, but the finance is first. And then we will have a last one, which looks at kind of an overview of enabling policies across all these topics and possibly other topics that needs to be in place to help us to actually implement and move forward in terms of green transition. So now for today's event, as Jonathan said, we will have a 2-hour session that will be divided into 2 main parts. The first part, beyond the introduction and the opening, what we are doing now, will be a presentation on sustainable finance. We have 2 great experts from UNEP and UNDP to talk about approaches, tools, and how to use these approaches and tools in strategic programming. And then we will have a plenary session that will last approximately 1 hour that will look at, it's a plenary, so we will have experts from the region and from other places as well to talk about practical solutions and their experiences trying to implement aspects of sustainable finance in their specific context, in their countries and in their work. During all this event, we will have a few quizzes and short questions that you can respond online. And also, if after each session, we will have a Q&A where there will be a space for the participants to ask questions. So now I'm handing over to my colleague, Darren Swanson, who talks about how we're going to do the online participation and the interaction. Darren.
Thank you very much, Livia, and welcome everybody. Just a few, I guess, house cleaning items to get ourselves organized for the collaboration here today as we go through the event. Just maybe a first order of business, if it'll be helpful, I guess, for everyone if you could, if you haven't already, to rename yourself so that we have both your name and your organization and what country you're working in. That'll help your colleagues to, I guess, know who's in the room, and it'll help you help the whole interaction collaborative process. So that's maybe first order of business, and there's a little bit of instructions here on the screen if that's not something you've done in the past, but I think for the most part, most of us have been avid Zoomers over the last little while on various virtual platforms. So if you can take that, if you have a bit of trouble with that, you can always just send a chat message in your chat space to Leslie Pa, who you'll see there. She can help us with our technical aspects, and Leslie is our instructional design advisor too for the event. Throughout the event, we're going to be sort of trying to interact as much as possible. Of course, we've got the presentations coming up here right away. But we're gonna have a Q&A, and you can use the chat space. So as the presenters are talking and you do have questions, we encourage you to use the chat space with your question, and we'll keep an eye on that and try to field as many as possible throughout the event. As Livia mentioned, we will have a series of quizzes and polls, and we'll be using the software slido.com, and we'll give you some instructions on how to interact with that. If you were part of the previous IBC webinar series on mainstreaming, you will be familiar with this polling. And we will also do something a bit new here today to help with the experience sharing. And we'll be using the discussion board, the virtual discussion board, padlet.com, where we'll have a space where you can type in examples in this case, of sustainable finance and challenges. And we can just keep track of our experiences and the information we want to share with each other. And then that'll all be part of be integrated into the report that you'll get, a guidance note you'll get following the webinar. That is a summary of sustainable finance and the presentations that you'll receive today. So let's go through and just get a little bit of practice. Let's maybe first start with the discussion board. This will be active mostly for the second half of the webinar, but I wanted to introduce it to you now because you can start to add examples even as you're hearing some presentations. But there's two ways you can access the discussion board. One, you can just use your camera on your phone. If you have your phone handy, you can just snap a picture or just put your camera up to the barcode, and you should go straight to the discussion board. And it'll look like what you have on the screen. Or if you don't have a camera, then you can just copy that link into a separate browser window on your computer, and you might have to navigate back and forth between the Zoom screen and this. Once you get to the board, you just click on the plus sign, and you can add an example to any one of those columns to address the questions. We're looking for examples of examples of sustainable finance in your country. You can type a bit of text to describe it, and you can also add a link, a document link, and that's very helpful too when we're compiling and case examples and information for the report that you'll receive. Of course, we want to hear also about your challenges and lessons learned in implementing sustainable finance in the country, the roadblocks, barriers, and we also want to hear a lot about what information and support, I guess, do you need as a UN country team to promote sustainable finance in your programming. So I encourage you to interact, and we will visit that chat space, and you'll see, live sort of postings as we go there, and even encourage our presenters and panelists as we go to add information to the discussion board. Okay, now let's move on. So for the polls and quizzes, we'll be using slido.com, and again, similar to the Padlet, you can access it either with the barcode or going to slido.com, and we'll give you a code for that. But let's just get hands-on right away and do a quick test here, and also to learn a bit about some context about everybody that's in the room. We have about, I guess, over 40 participants already right now online, and what we have is just a word cloud here where we just want to get a sense for the environmental issues in your country that really are most pressing, are most acute, just to get a sense for the environmental landscape. This is a word cloud. You can use your camera to scan this barcode. That'll bring you to the Slido screen, and you can type in your response, or you could just go to slido.com and type in the code IBC green, and you'll go to the site. So I'll give people just a few minutes to get a sense for what is going on there. What are the pressures out there? Where will finance need to be directed in various country contexts? I think it's interesting to see where the issues are pressing. We can see already that we've got a lot that are climate-induced pressures on the environment, like wildfires, flooding. But we got a lot of issues that we've seen and we know about. Air pollution, of course. We got recycling, which is going to tie into circular economy issues. Soil depletion, we see invasive species, but a lot of biodiversity loss. Air pollution and air quality, of course, is top of mind in a lot of countries. Deforestation, unsustainable consumption, again, getting back to some circular economy issues. So I think everybody's getting a good sense for how to work with the Slido. Excellent. Good, everyone's getting a good handle on this, and we'll share some of this information too in the reporting process. We do want to move on though, and we've just got one more practice for you before we get to the substance of the first half of the webinar. And thank you very much, everybody, for participating in that screen. I want to go to just the next question here, just to get another sort of a sense, and this will help our presenters too and our panelists. This is just a different type of poll question. We're looking sort of, what is your level of understanding of both, I guess, the sources and the instruments of sustainable finance or finance for sustainable development, just to get a sense for the experience level in the room. I think as this being a relatively new area and also a sort of fast moving area, it was intuitive that the responses that we're seeing right now, that the awareness is where the big area is, and it's good. We've got a good mix of participants in the meeting that have good expertise in the area, as well as a lot of people where this is a new topic. So for Daniel and Suren, I think this is a good, you get a good sense for the value that this event will have for everybody. Okay, I think everybody's got a good handle on this. Let's, without further ado, I'll turn the floor back just over to Livia to set us up for the speakers. And I'll unshare, Daniel, and you can put your slides on the screen.
Thank you, Darren, and it's very exciting to see so many you participating in the poll. So we have few more as the event goes. But so today we are now ready for the first part of the event, which is to get the overview of the core that we will discuss today on sustainable finance. And we have two great experts. So first of all, it's Daniel Bozars, who is a regional coordinator for Europe for UNEP Finance Initiative. And then we have also Suren Pogosyan, who is SDG Finance Advisor for UNDP. And now it's over to Daniel and Suren to provide us the presentation. Thank you. And there will be space for your questions as well during the presentation and after. In case you have a burning question, please feel free to type it to the chat. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Livia, for the introduction. I will start sharing my screen, so please let me know if you can see it.
We see it, Daniel.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much. So yeah, thanks for the introduction. So you here see as well that, I'm Daniel from UNEP, and I'm together today with Suren from UNDP. And we were going to start, let's say, the wonderful world of sustainable finance. So first of all, I would like to introduce by saying that, well, why is this relevant? Well, it's because the climate crisis that we're facing, the triple planetary crisis, as well as the broader sustainability crisis, can only be managed and averted through rechanneling of money, mainly of private sector investment and finance to ensure that all sectors across the economy are transitioning towards sustainability and to achieve the goals of the Paris Climate Agreement. This as well is highly complemented by public finance. And in that regard, let's say, we see that complementarity playing along all of these elements. So to get a bit more into the details, is within the Paris Climate Agreement, Article 2.1.c, it commits governments to ensure that all financing, public and private, becomes consistent with the objectives. So this is also something that has been included in the Paris Climate Agreement. And then finally, just estimation that I think you will see some more, and I believe that Suren also has some very interesting numbers in his presentation, that the European Commission calculates that Europe as a whole will need an estimated 300 billion euro in additional investment per year during this decade in order to achieve the reductions in emissions that are necessary. So when we talk about sustainable finance, what do we mean? Well, this is within the broader role of financing green transitions. But of course, green can mean something very specific within the realm of sustainable finance. So I took this from the UNEP inquiry, in which everything is stemming from sustainable development, and we can see how the different elements interplay. So when we have environmental issues, when we talk about, for example, environmental finance or green finance, we talk about elements that cover climate change mitigation, climate change adaptation, and other environmental objectives. So as you can see here, climate finance would mean finance that goes towards climate change mitigation and or adaptation. And when it includes other environmental objectives, as for example, water pollution, it can be considered green. So it's the broader element. Then when we go to social, it's already social environmental. And when we include governance and in some cases economic issues, because for finance, economic issues are always included, we talk about sustainable finance. And this is where the issues of ESG that you may have also heard about are stemming from. So environmental, social, and governance characteristics integrated into finance considerations. So this will be the overall introduction of what we mean when we talk about sustainable finance. And I will start now to explain also a bit more of what is UNEP-FI and what is that we do, because there's many actors in the UN system that are working on sustainable finance. So UNEP-FI and UNDP are quite critical, but we also have UNDESA, ILO, and other institutions that are working on different aspects, but of course that they are all working towards the same goals that are the 2030 Agenda, the Paris Climate Agreement, and the Sustainable Development Goals. So for UNEP-FI, so I will explain briefly the alignment approach and the voluntary pledges on climate action that we foster. So what is UNEP-FI? It's a wonderful acronym that means United Nations Environment Programme Finance Initiative. So we are part of the economy division of UNEP, and we are a partnership between the UN and the global finance sector. So we work in partnership with, nowadays I have the latest data, 468 banks, insurers, and investors to help create a financial sector that helps the people on the planet. So that integrates environmental, social, and governance characteristics into their operations. We do this by a direct membership approach. So we do have financial institutions that join the initiative and sign two specific principles and guiding norms that mainstream sustainable finance. For example, the UN Principle for Responsible Investment, PSI, Principle for Sustainable Insurance, and PRB, Principle for Responsible Banking, that are for banks, insurers, and investors. The investment principles, so the PRI, is now a separate institution, but is also coordinated, say, within themselves, and they have a large membership. Now we collaborate with them at a higher level. And we co-create with the financial institutions research tools, peer exchange forums to help them to deliver on their sustainable journey for stakeholders. So we work with financial institutions to make sure that their financing, so not only their operations, not the cars that their executives drive or the paper that they consume, but the money that they lend, the money that they invest, actually helps to achieve the Paris Climate Agreement goals and the Sustainable Development Goals. So regarding our strategy, how it is that we work, well, we work with an institutional change framework that is to change the way that financial institutions work. So we build capabilities, we have global programs with specific regional delivery, and we focus a lot on the members' implementation. This is structured as well with a system change, broader perspective, that is with engagement with financial regulators and the engagement with UN and UNEP in terms of strengthening the alignment with the goals, with collective action and intersecting with soft norm setting and regulatory approaches as the two other pillars that structure these two concentric circles. So with regards to our structure, it's now growing. So we have four thematic areas that are climate change, ecosystems, positive impact, and social issues that are now being expanded to pollution, resource efficiency, and global policy approaches, with three other axes that are the industry approaches: banking, insurance, and investment. So how are we structured in terms of membership? Well, we work with currently latest data that I have from 15 August 2022, 468 members, 70% of them banks, 27% insurers, 3% investors. The investor number, it's tricky because before it was larger, but given that PRI has separated, they have around 5,000 members and we collaborate with them quite closely. Those were the first principles that were established in 2006, followed by insurance and banking in 2012, 2019. In terms of regions, as you can see, and this is what is relevant in terms of my position as regional coordinator for Europe, is that Europe is the largest membership with around 50% of the members, with 245 members, followed by Asia Pacific, Latin America, Caribbean, Africa, and North America, which includes USA, Canada. So if we go to the European strategy, what are the priorities that we have in Europe in terms of integrating all of these elements into financial institutions? First is regulatory engagement with the EU as a priority. I'm based in Brussels, 5 minutes away from the European Commission and the European Parliament. So that is a clear declaration of intent in terms of why do we see that this is impacting majority of the institutions we're working with. The second element that is critical for our approach is expanding membership in Central and Eastern Europe, Baltics, Balkans, Caucasus, and Central Asia, which I think is critically relevant for this session, is our approach in terms of areas where we do not have so much membership. The issue for us is that in order to be able to affect and impact financial institutions, they need to join our initiative and they need to commit to our principles. And that is the alignment approach that we have. So you will see the map where we have and where we don't have members. And then the third element is to leverage supporting institutions, endorsers, and other stakeholders to reach out to institutions more effectively. This is where UN presence on the ground is critically important for us. So regarding the membership in Europe, here is just very simple. I didn't go into different shades of green in terms of the level of members. Green is countries where we have members, orange countries where we do not have members. So you can really see the regions where we're lacking, mainly Caucasus and Central Asia. And I would like to take this opportunity to say that if you ever speak to financial institutions, please don't hesitate to reach out to me in case you need further information on how we work and how we can collaborate or improve the integration. So regarding the UN Sustainable Finance Framework, so here we go in terms of what are the alignment approaches that we have at UNEP-FI. So you can think of sustainable finance as either A, aligning your approaches, your financing with sustainability, or B, risk. That would be understanding what are the risks that your portfolio may suffer in terms of losses, given the impacts that businesses that you finance may suffer from climate change. So there's two approaches in terms of how to apply this, and I'm going to focus today on our approach on alignment. So how financial institutions can shift their money into sustainable projects. So the PRI is the first one that we created, Principle for Sustainable Insurance is the second one, Principle for Responsible Banking the third, and then we have what we call coalitions of the willing. Here I focus on climate and nature briefly. There are the net zero approaches. So this is Race to Zero certified financial institution commitments towards Paris Climate Agreement 1.5 degrees, no overshoot scenarios. So this is for asset owners, banking, insurance, and then we have the Task Force for Nature Financial Related Disclosures. This is all under the umbrella of GFAN, so the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero, that you may have heard about. So I will go a bit more into depth into this, but first of all, let's start with our largest, I think, given that PRI is a different institution, our UNEP-FI largest initiative by far, which is the Principle for Responsible Banking. So this is a framework for ensuring that signatory banks' strategy and practice align with the vision that society has set out for the future of sustainable development goals and the Paris Climate Agreement in terms of the financing of sustainability. We have 280 plus signatory banks of around the world, 65 plus countries. They encompass 45% of the global banking sector, of the private global banking sector, with around 70 trillion of US dollars in assets. This is an enormous amount of money, and in order to achieve the transition is just a bit of a fraction of that. So hopefully with this collective action, we may be able to go closer to the goal. In terms of the market penetration, here you can see the 10 largest banks by total assets in each of the regions. You can see that in Europe, mainly Western European banks are almost all participating, with HSBC not participating, but in the net zero banking, so looking into climate. Then we can see the principles themselves. So what it is that we mean when we talk about actually integrating sustainability into your organization. So first of all is alignment, that is to committing to align your business operations to the SDGs and the Paris Climate Agreement. Impact and target setting. This is the core element of how you can actually calculate your alignment. That it is, a bank needs to understand from their operations and the financing, what are the areas where they have positive and negative impacts in order to maximize the positive and minimize the negative. Then to work with clients and customers to engage with them, transition their approaches. And then the rest of the elements is to work in terms of stakeholders, NGOs, communities, governance and culture, so the integrated within their organization, sustainability considerations, so to have a proper approach for the CEO, etc. And then transparency and accountability, that we normally review every year what is happening with all of our signatory banks, plus they need to report on their impact and target settings and to showcase what is that they're doing with assurance. So that is a critical element. So it's a 4-year journey. After the 4 years, what we want them to have is this integration. So after 4 years, I mean, it's not that the process stops after 4 years, but after those 4 years, they need to have at least analyze their impact on planet and people, set and implemented targets. So the targets need to be related to the impact analysis. For example, if a bank has a lot of impact on mortgages, they may say, okay, we want to increase by 50% or energy efficient mortgages by 2030. And then accountability and measuring progress, that is the reporting approach. Regarding the process, they just need to sign the principles, become a member of INPFI, and then promote the commitment and implement it. So if you have banks in your region, in your country that are interested in participating or increasing their sustainability integration, we can help. Then regarding insurance, so the principle of sustainable insurance, they work with regards of the role of insurance. So insurers are risk managers, investors, and insurers as a whole. And they need to really both mitigate the impact that the clients have, but as well looking into how the risk is actually going to, let's say, lower the capitalization of the companies that they are investing in, how to better manage ESG issues. So what are the principles themselves? Well, they were launched in 2012 as a global framework for the insurance industry to address environmental, social, and governance risks and opportunities. So it is a both risk and alignment framework. And the vision is to, through risk and through understanding where the risk allocation is going from the insurance portfolios, to make sure that the insurance industry is trusted and it's able to interact properly in the sustainability sphere, to prevent and reduce environmental, social, and governance risks, and better manage the opportunities that are provided by an appropriate sustainability integration. So the principles are 4. So it's to embed in decision-making environmental, social, and governance considerations. For the insurance business, this means the underwriting, so not the investments, but more about, okay, you have a company that wants to insure against the risk, but they can also be facing climate risks. So they work with clients and businesses together to raise awareness on the issues and risks that may be coming. Also working with governments, regulators, and other key stakeholders to ensure that there's a supporting framework around these ESG issues. And then finally, demonstrate accountability and transparency, for which they also need to report in implementing the principles. So regarding climate change, so now we're going to go into the bottom elements of the slide that I presented before in terms of the net zero alliances. So we have climate risk as one of the elements and climate alignment as one of the other areas. So climate risk and disclosures, we have been working quite a lot on TCFD with banks, investors, and insurers. But on climate alignment, that is the focus that I want to have today. We have 3 alliances, again, certified by Race to Zero, on banks, asset owners, and insurers. So we're going to go one by one to showcase what it is that we mean by this. So net zero, again, to achieve the 1.5 degree goal of the Paris Climate Agreement, CO2 emissions need to be cut in half every 10 years until 2050. That is a tremendous challenge. And for financial institutions, this means that they need to support this decarbonization goal as key actors in the economies. they need to invest about 4 trillion a year until 2050 to ensure that this is actually able to be done. And public sector alone is not going to be doing it. So private sector engagement and commitments need to be fostered in order for this to happen. So this is what we represent in terms of net zero. It's a global campaign with Race to Zero, with 3 initiatives that are participating into a broader financing industry umbrella. So UN, UNEP-FI, together with PRI, we manage 3 alliances. So UNEP-FI alone, we manage the Net Zero Banking Alliance and the Insurance Alliance, and together with PRI, the Asset Owner Alliance. What do we mean by this? Well, there's approaches that need to be taken differently with each of the different finance sector actors. It's not the same a business of an insurer as an asset owner of a bank. So with asset owners, we're looking into a portfolio of investments. And the Net Zero Asset Owner Alliance is based with a target setting protocol that covers the majority of the asset classes that these institutional investors have. And they provide specific ranges where the portfolio needs to be reduced and by when. The first reduction range is by 2025, the second by 2030. It's already a 65% range, and we're aiming to that 100% reduction of emissions by 2050. So which kind of targets? So this is all about targets, about understanding where is your impact, where are the sectors that you're financing, and what are the targets that you need to set in order to reduce that negative impact and make sure that you reach 1.5 degrees by 2050. So this means engagement targets, engage with the clients in order to make them reduce their emissions, sector targets to set your goals and targets within your portfolio in terms of the sectors that you're financing and the emissions that they have, sub-portfolio related to the previous one, and then financing transition targets, that is to make sure that you are financing companies that go the way. And here we have some examples, for example, that the UN Pension Fund has a goal to reduce absolute footprint of equity and corporate bonds portfolio by 40% by 2025. That is a portfolio approach in terms of products. Then we have Pension Denmark as well with a sector target, Aviva, that is one of the largest investors as well with engagement targets, and CDPQ, that is again another large investor with the specific assets that they want to hold and to have a specific envelope of green transition financing. So insurance. Well, insurance is a bit more complicated because it's not that you can allocate directly the money in terms of the investments, because for that you have the Asset Owner Alliance, but this is about how do you allocate risk appropriately. So we're working with PCAF, so the platform for carbon accounting financials, to work out what does it mean to actually shift risk approaches in terms of allocating, let's say, that premiums that go into the insured entities, to make sure that you're not financing, let's say, you are not insuring something that is risky, and then to set targets in a way that you can ensure that these things are working in the appropriate form. So this is coming in the coming months, so I won't stop more on this, but I'm going to stop more on the Net Zero Banking Alliance, because again, with banks, this is a large endeavor. The majority of the European economy, if not all of the European economy, is mainly financed by banks. And what we have here is an industry-led, but UN-convened as the other alliances approach, where the members of the alliance commit to transition their operational and attributable, so scope 1, 2, 3, greenhouse gas emissions from their lending and investment portfolios. So this is for banks, but it also covers their investment portfolios to align with net zero pathways by 2050 or so. This means to set 2030 and 2050 net zero targets with a 1.5 degree scenario with no and low overshoots. And they need to annually report on the targets and the progress. So again, this is the alignment approach of UNEP-FI to make sure that the banks and financial institutions use their financing to set targets to appropriately finance the transition. This is the target setting approach where we started last year in April. That was the launch of the initiative, and we are going to be seeing the first round of targets, I believe, by already next year. So this is coming quite soon, by mid next year. And then we see that in the third year, they need to set an action plan, the full set of targets by the end of the third year, since signature, and then the action plans again for 2050 from the end of year 4. So this is the key elements of how we structure our approaches, how we structure the commitments and the target setting. And the state of implementation, well, it covers everything in the balance sheet. We have 9 key economic sectors that need to be transitioned, as well as we have the IPCC scenarios, IES scenarios as the one that need to be followed, and the specific months in terms of issue targets and impact areas and all of the economic sectors. So these reflect exactly this timeline. There's 4 guidelines. I'm not going to stop too much on this, but I just wanted to show you some examples of Net Zero Banking Alliance banks targets. So we have 12 banks a few months ago, that probably now is more. And their early targets are promising. We have, for example, Intesa Sanpaolo, that they have a baseline in 2019 of 214 kilograms of CO2 emissions by megawatt hour for power generation financing. And they want to have a target in 2030 of more than 50% reduction. And similarly, Citigroup, so American bank, that they're looking into a 63% reduction in scope 1 emissions intensity per megawatt hour. So there's 2 different ones. One is a baseline, the other is a percentage approach. Both are equally fine, and there's more types of targets that can be set. And then finally, just to showcase that in this case, we have all of the 10 largest banks in Europe that have signed. Finally, just to conclude in this part of the presentation, we wanted just to bring you a bit of this is a paper that we provided as input to the G20 Sustainable Finance Working Group, coordinated by UNDP, in which we highlight best practices in terms of what are the best things that you can do in order to finance for the finance sector net zero commitments. So this is a list of what actually you need to take into account if you're a financial institution and you want to integrate net zero commitment into your business. And it goes from aligning with science-based scenarios, 1.5 degrees preferably, with the assumptions that the sectors need to be aligned as well with those scenarios, establish near-term targets, etc., etc. So this is more of a checklist that if at some point, for example, you're approached by a financial institution and you are thinking about, okay, what it is that this institution may need to do. If you don't want to contact UNEP-FI, which I would actually highly encourage you to do, this could be a good list to have handy. So this would be the end, let's say, for the UNEP-FI alignment approaches presentation, and I hand over to Suren. I will, in any case, be passing the slides. So Suren, over to you.
Thank you, Daniel. Good afternoon, colleagues. I will present some of the aspects that UNDP is engaged with, and it's based primarily on the institutional solution that UNDP came up with, sustainable finance upgraded at HQ level a few years back. So we have identified some solutions how we can approach to the sustainable development finance globally and in our region in particular. But let me start with the definition of how we see the problem itself. The problem is that most of the problem we see that it's not about lack of money, but it's about how the financial architecture is working around sustainable development agenda. And here are a couple of data points just to to make the point clearly. So SDG financing needs have increased by 70% just in the last year or so because of the post-COVID and war and other conflict-related issues in our region in particular. So equivalent of 52 million full-time jobs were lost globally because of COVID. Of the total increase in global FDI flows, around 75 or even more than 75% of these investments go into developed economies. So we see that geographically we don't actually ensure that the financing goes where it is most needed. Fossil fuel subsidies have increased to 6 trillion last year. Since Paris Agreement, commercial banks invested more than 3.8 trillion into fossil fuels. And just to compare these numbers with what is needed in terms of additional funding to achieve sustainable development goals, it exceeds the annual estimate for the additional required amount. So, and 418 trillion that is available in terms of financial assets, we need only 1% annually as a flow. So literally, it's not that significant in terms of the availability of the money. It's about how we direct, how the financial architecture globally actually redirects this money to where it is needed geographically, to whom it is needed in terms of the social groups and target groups, and to the projects and sectors that actually need this financing the most. Next slide, please. So the solution, as we see, is for the sustainable finance architecture is to deliberately design to accelerate investment into sustainable development goals, and SDGs are the primary sort of framework that we are using at UNDP. and secondly, account for its progress to a broad range of actors. Next slide, please. So at the Sustainable Finance Hub with UNDP, we have come up with 4+1 service offers that we go to the countries with. And why +1? The fifth one is about something we call SDG Finance Academy. So it's about capacity building around all the 4 other areas. So this is why it's +1. The primary sort of mainstream service offers are 4. One is public finance for SDGs, naturally, and UNDP is actually working on sustainable development and climate, in particular, finance in public sector since 2010-11 very heavily. And I'll go into more details about climate change finance in a few more minutes. So the second service offer is about unlocking private capital and aligning business operations for the SDGs. And I'm happy that Daniel also mentioned about this a lot and quite heavily discussed this, because we can't ensure that public finance will be enough to cover the needs. That's definitely not the case. So private sector needs to be engaged into SDG financing area. However, because it's much more dispersed compared to the public sector, it requires more efforts and more toolkit to be deployed compared to the public sector. Third one is SDG impact management and finance tracking. And just to avoid any confusion, we're basically talking about adding the impact dimension, exactly what Daniel was talking about. So to adding impact dimension to ESG type of activities that banks or big corporations or small medium enterprises actually take over. The emerging evidence comes from, especially from European continent, is that ESG standards, even if they are properly adopted by a corporation or a bank, does not necessarily translate into, say, lending decision making at its full scale. So there's a break between the procedural adoption of ESG standards and how that is translated or not translated towards the impact. So Daniel was presenting this in a lot of detail, so I'll skip that. And finally, integrated national financing frameworks and country portfolios. This is quite critical area. This is very much supported by many development partners, EU in particular in our region and globally. But the challenge and the benefit of this solution and service offer is that we try to avoid any isolated approaches for the previous 3 areas that I was talking about. So under this INFF, we're also helping to connect the tools between the public sector within various tools of the public sector finance or within various tools of the private capital mobilization and across the different tools. So public finance and private capital aspects. I'll give a couple of examples in a second. Next slide, please. So this is the map for our region, RBEC, that we cover, Regional Bureau for Europe and CIS countries. And here's the illustration of the number of activities or scale of activities that countries in our region implement in relation to SDG finance specifically, at least to the extent that we see it at regional and global level. And on the right hand, you can also see breakdown it by 7 specific SDG finance areas. And in the context of this call, it's very not surprising and also very good to showcase that the blue color lines, which are actually dominating in most of the country cases, are the leveraging international public finance flow. So basically, we're talking about GEF, GCF type of activities, which are 100% directed towards sustainable development. But not only GEF and GCF related activities, but we have a lot of activities on INFFs, red color or orange color on budgeting for SDGs. We have emerging cases on taxation, which is very interesting, and I'm happy to share in a minute a couple of cases on this and other aspects. Next slide, please. So I want to highlight on this integrated approach. And let me bring an example. So when, for example, in one of the countries, we started to work on bringing SDG taxonomy to the public finance, especially on the budget expenditure side. In parallel to that, we, with the same Minister of Finance, started to engage on taxation policy alignment with SDGs. And in doing so, we also suggested, and I think this is a valid recommendation to basically all country cases, that the same taxonomy is being used for different financing flows within the public sector. And actually, I will actually strongly recommend that we go beyond the public sector and also offer the same taxonomy being used by the private sector. So if we have the same taxonomy used for budget expenditures by SDGs and SDG targets, so 169, and then we have tax expenditures, for example, similarly labeled, tagged by the same taxonomy, and in parallel, we also have the same Minister of Finance now discussing maybe tagging the debt-related inflows and related pipeline projects that from, for example, SDG bonds, they direct into specific project areas. We also use the same tagging principles and the same taxonomy. And then let's go beyond the public sector. What Daniel also was referring to. Imagine we have the same taxonomy being used for the banking sector, for a loan portfolio, for which specific sustainable development area these loans are actually used for, or pension funds, or diaspora funds, etc., etc. So bringing all this together into one single comparable, cross-comparable data sets is extremely useful for the decision makers, both on the public sector and private sector side, because they can actually understand where actually the gaps in financing exist and where actually the needs are highest in terms of the SDG relevance. So we are already starting working with this on various finance ministries. On the tax expenditure side, we have a very interesting case, again, coming from our region, global first case, but coming from our region, where we did the mapping of existing tax incentives, which is 4.5% to GDP in that particular country case. So 4.5% of GDP equivalent has been tagged by SDG relevance. And for again, for the purposes of this goal, let me say that if my memory is correct, there were most of these tax incentives, like 85% of tax incentives were directed to SDG 1 and SDG 8. And only 3% out of whole this huge amount of tax expenditures that government does not receive legally, lives in the private sector, in the households or in the businesses. So only 3% out of this 4.5% of GDP, it has relevance to SDG 7. So this is the tool that allows us to reveal the situation and help Ministry of Finance or Ministry of Economy to adjust the taxation policies. So the next round of the tax incentives have more SDGs coming into the decision making. Next slide, please. Now I'll deep dive into one of the specific areas, into the public sector related and climate change or green finance toolkit. Next slide, please. So this is the table that this is the sort of structure of the toolkit that we're using for last more than a decade, and the toolkit is designed to achieve to serve different purposes. On the left hand, I'm bringing in what kind of objectives we actually can help governments to achieve. For example, on understanding how much government spends on climate change or green. It's not a surprise that many governments up until today, they don't know the relevance of their national budgets in relation to climate change. So how much actually, which projects and how much in terms of money they spend attention towards climate change. Then the next objective is make climate change finance visible in the budget. That's for the transparency, but also budget negotiation purposes. So when it is becoming visible, it's not only increasing accountability, but it also helps in budget negotiations with the parliament. So, and because parliaments usually are more on the side of the sustainable development, they put additional pressure once the supply information comes in. So demand creates the supply, but first we need to start with the supply. So it's a chain of supply driving the demand and then increasing the quality of the supply. The next objective is mobilizing and aligning more resources for climate change. And there's a range of tools available for that. And then increase accountability for budget spending on climate change. We support a lot on climate change budget reporting, collaborative research on climate change related expenditures. And finally, bridging climate change planning with the regular budget process through more sort of integrated and systemic solutions, like bringing climate change financing framework into the medium-term expenditure framework of a government. And with the context of INFF, this is becoming even more. And final tool is just on climate change budget integration index is just a rapid assessment tool on where the budget system stands in relation to climate change, not in terms of numbers, but in terms of the systems. So without going into details of individual tool, because that will take a lot of time, let me highlight that we are increasingly starting to work on interconnectedness between climate change and green. There are a few country cases where we are actually slightly moving from the pure climate change focus to green focus with French colleagues and then using French state budget green tagging system as one of the good examples to follow in our region. For those who don't know, the benefit of the French model is that it tracks not only positive green investments from the budget, from the state budget, labeling it with different shades of the green, but also they have a brown expenditures being tagged. So the parliament receives information both on pro-green and anti-green budget lines. So that helps a lot, not only to mobilize more money towards green, but decrease some of the brown expenditures. Okay, next slide, please. So this is the evolution ladder as we usually use when we approach the governments or other counterparts international in the countries. So we first start with informing stage, and this is sort of a natural flow of change management. So informing, like presenting facts, then engaging and convincing. So advocacy campaign, advocacy related toolkit is being used. And then only after that, we go to the enabling stage where we were supporting the supply side of the reforms by introducing tools, by piloting them, by sometimes integrating into the financial management information systems. And then final stage is when we have this integrated climate change budget decision making through, as I said, climate change financing framework, for example. But let me repeat also, reiterate the point that we don't perceive the climate change or green as a sort of standalone thing. Our INFF platform actually helps linking a lot of activities on green and climate with parallel activities. For example, for the same taxation policy, there are interconnections between gender and climate change that we can stimulate through the tax incentives. There could be other areas where environmental aspects or climate change aspects can be integrated in parallel streams of work with ministries of finance. For example, it could be through child-related or where we work together with UNICEF, or social policy-related topics like removal of carbon subsidies, fossil fuel subsidies from the state budget system. Increases social risks within countries, and without, again, specifying exact cases, but still it's a significant challenge of that kind of policy over the population, especially the vulnerable parts of the population. So you need to accompany it with relevant social policies, more targeted, so it doesn't go across the whole population. As we know, the supply side subsidization is in most of the cases not that efficient and even sometimes not effective. And sometimes even it works against the proper policies because you subsidize more on the other side. I see my slides have been removed. I assume that means my time's up. Is that correct?
Maybe we lost Daniel in the connection who had the slides, perhaps?
No problem, because my actually literally last slide was just to showcase a couple of knowledge products that we have prepared in last few years on climate, green related budget tagging systems, through which we help governments to introduce the proper tracking systems, which also helps the decision making. And also we're also going quite deep into the overall SDG budgeting and SDG financing related handbooks and knowledge products to be also developed. So to sum up, as I said earlier, we try to approach to this topic holistically through the whole SDG framework, but in some cases we go and implement deep dive instruments with the governments. And we work not only with governments, we are also supporting very much the coalition of finance ministers for climate action. We have 2 countries in our region that have subscribed to Helsinki principles. And this is just one of the examples. Also, G20 related activities, and we increasingly start to work with private sector. And one also comment in relation to the previous presenter, to Daniel's presentation, that in terms of the insurance, we also try to work on wider aspects of risk financing. So it's not only insurance companies through which you can de-risk some of the sustainable development related activities, but also you can work with finance ministers and other actors to introduce other mechanisms for risk financing, not necessarily through insurance. So that's it from my side. I'll stop here. Over.
Thank you, and I'm sorry for the mishap with the slides. I think something happened at Daniel's connection, but we will provide the notes and the links as part of the summary document, so people can access it.
Yep.
Maybe.
I'm back. Sorry, it just dropped. I can continue with the presentation because I think next part is quite important. So just very briefly to finalize in terms of the regulation, because this is the third part of the presentation. I think if I don't present, I mean, some of the elements will not make a lot of sense in terms of the next discussion, especially for the presentation from Mercedes. So on the next slide, I mean, this is about how financial regulation and regulation as a whole can be a key element in terms of ensuring that the financial sector can be not only integrating within their approaches and their operations, the sustainability considerations, so the E, S, and G that we spoke before. And it's not only that the only thing that the public sector can do is also the approaches that Suren was presenting in terms of budgeting and in terms of the financing internally and how to prepare for that approach. But they can also work in terms of regulating the real economy and the financial sector in order to ensure that they are not doing just greenwashing and that they are just pretending to do some key actions, but they are not really there. So this is necessary for both increasing the harmonization, but as well to regulate that the industry is behaving, let's say. So there's a lot of policy framework for sustainable finance. I'm going to focus quite a lot, let's say, on the EU approach, because that's the most developed in the world, and key three elements that are normally integrated into this kind of approaches. That would be taxonomies, disclosures, and prudential rules. And by financial regulation, what we mean is the integration of sustainability considerations across financial regulatory frameworks, which include the disclosures, the governance duties, the taxonomies, and financial system stability rules. And this covers both real economy companies, financial institutions, banks, investors, and insurers, as well as pension providers and others. So taxonomies, this is the global effort on taxonomy map, where you can see places where taxonomies in green are in place. High-level guidance is available in light green, under development in blue, and in discussion in light blue. So the whole world is becoming, let's say, more taxonomized, if we can say so, but we're also seeing that there's a bit of a lack of integration and harmonization across the board. So that is why it's important to understand what a taxonomy is, how normally they're built, and what are they for. So first of all, on the EU taxonomy, it goes into those elements that we were seeing in the beginning in terms of environmental, social, governance elements. First focusing on climate change, so the climate aspect of finance, but then also going to the full green approach in terms of other environmental objectives. For this, what the taxonomy does is to define economic activities that can be considered environmentally sustainable by any economic actor. This includes substantial contribution, do no significant harm, and minimum safeguards. What does it mean? Well, that an activity needs to have a positive impact in one of the 6 environmental objectives, do no significant harm to any of the other 5, and comply with minimum social safeguards like ILO Convention, UN Guiding Principles for Business and Human Rights. And it applies to financial market participants at the product level, to large companies at the entity level, so showcasing how much of their revenues and expenditures are going towards sustainable activities, and to the EU and member states when defining specific standards, measures, and labels on sustainability. So taxonomies normally include these elements. In some cases, they can also be transition taxonomies with green, yellow, and red elements, so that can also be integrated. Regarding disclosures normally relate to either entities or financial products or both, in terms of like how an entity is sustainable, how a product is sustainable. And we have seen a lot of developments around the world with the EU taxonomy itself being a disclosure regime. We have the ISSB, International Sustainability Standards Board, releasing exposure drafts on sustainability reporting, same at European level with more concrete drafts, plus due diligence prudential requirements in terms of disclosures. The US SEC as well has released some elements, and all of these need to be underpinned by data. So there is an issue that there is not enough data normally. I will just go now quickly to the final element that would be the prudential levers. This relates to what central banks do. So if you, for example, have been, let's say, talking to a central bank, in many cases, they are thinking, oh, how can we shift our monetary policy to make it more green? How we can shift our own operations to be more green? But this is all about how do they manage and regulate the institutions that they have under their supervision, which is with Pillar 1 measures. That means to integrating elements into the capital rules in order to make sure that when a bank, for example, lends to something brown, is penalized, or when this lend to something green, they are incentivized. Pillar 2 measures, that this is more about the business model integration, or Pillar 3 disclosures, that is to understand from a disclosure perspective what it is that the bank is financing. They also have stress testing tools and on operations and monetary policy, as we said before. So stress testing is more of a forward planning, horizon scanning approach in terms of understanding what are the key risks that financial institutions and the economies are going to face in the future, and how to prepare and better regulate for them. And I think, yeah, I will stop here. There's also 2 slides in terms of the sustainable finance regulation work in progress in the EU, and one about how it is actually integrated across the board. So I stop here, and thank you for letting me these 5 more minutes.
Thank you, and thank you for being so brief. We have some questions in the chat, so maybe we can look at just some of those and then go back to our quiz and then continue with the panel. So one of the questions is related to the issue that how the engagement with the banks and the insurers at the high level, at the headquarters, can actually help at the country level or at the country level operation. Does that kind of high level collaboration actually trickles down to change in local lending and investment, or it's much more the higher level bank representatives are more interested? Okay. So if you can give any examples.
Yes, for sure. This is a very, very good question. And indeed, I mean, this is something that normally I would like to call, let's say that we, at least in my own terminology, this is what I call the hamburger approach, in terms of like you need to, in order to work on sustainability, you need to work throughout the whole parts of the hamburger. You need the top management to be convinced that they're actually working out the key elements in their strategy on integrating sustainability as a key consideration. So we work with C-level executives in order to make sure that they understand sustainability, that they can integrate it and mandate at the lower levels of management as well, that sustainability integration. We work then with the middle manager. That's where the core of the meat is at, in terms of deciding how to finance, how to measure risks, how to work on sustainability considerations. So we work not only with sustainability teams, but also with the business and risk, to make sure that everything's integrated and makes sense across the institution. And then finally, at the bottom, we have the transmission mechanism to the real economy. And we do not work so much on that front in terms of the product development or that, but it's more for them to understand how they can understand sustainability at the, let's say, financing approach. So that is how it works. And then regarding the HQ versus on the ground, hopefully this has a bit, let's say, responded, like branch versus headquarters, but we also, let's say, hear about the importance of integrating, let's say, the approach from, let's say, employees to C-level management. So, an examples, well, for example, we are collaborating with large banks in Europe. I think, for example, if I can think about climate, we have Santander, there is a large Spanish bank. They're working, let's say, on sustainability integration across the board. And in the beginning, let's say, they were very much looking at the product level. They were looking into trade finance, elements that could be related to that, how to define specific projects. But little by little, that was integrated into the risk management elements. And as well, there was a big push from the C-level. And that all became, let's say, a whole integration of sustainability within the institution, and they're rolling it out across regions all around the world. So that's also an example in terms of a large bank with HQ in Europe, and then integrating, for example, in Latin America. So.
Thank you. And thank you for the example. I'm not sure, Suren, do you want to also just maybe provide some insights from your region, and then we can move to the quizzes, and then we will still have space for more questions during the panel.
No, I think it's better we move because I don't have
Okay.
much to what
Thank
Daniel
you.
said.
Very. Thank you so much. Okay, so let's do a quiz with Darren, and then we will move to the panel.
I think, Olivia, I think perhaps maybe the quiz part we can maybe come back to at the end. I think that's good. There's a bit of good discussion here. Maybe we could draw on. Maybe we could. There's one more question I see in the chat space that maybe perhaps Seren might be able to tackle, or Daniel, or a colleague from Moldova asked about how would spending $480 billion or the additional trillions to be spent on green transition would impact CO2 emission levels. Was there an assessment of in terms of additional production levels, or say flights, events, etc.? I guess what was the level of assessment? Is there any comment that can be made? There's the last question that's in the chat space, essentially.
Yes, thank you, Darren. Thank you for the question. It's a question that I share myself, but because I'm not aware of the such assessment done. But just to be accurate on the numbers themselves, the numbers that I was mentioning, 418 trillion, was on financial assets, and it was for all sustainable development goals, not only for the green transition. But it doesn't matter. The numbers doesn't matter. The question still is valid. Although my understanding, although I'm not engineer on this end, but my understanding is that one-time investments, which actually sometimes are not fully green themselves, like in electric vehicle production, for example, these one-time not so green investments still at the end of the day still is green, because it helps decreasing the brown pollution for the whole duration of the car usage. And just as just an example, so this is absolutely correct question on the first sort of peak type of investments, but to be direct on.
No.
Yeah, I think Marika was suggesting, I'm sorry for putting you on spot, to weigh on this question.
Yes, do you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, please go ahead.
My name is Marika Palosari. I work for the UNEP. I wanted to give one part of the answer to the great question from Gennady Gretu from IOM. And I understand this question is probably linked to the challenge and goal that we have as the UN system in terms of informing, engaging, and convincing that Suren was earlier talking about. How do we convince the governments and financial institutions to rechannel the investments? So we do have quite a bit of material and science and studies, for example, from World Bank that we use at UNEP when we try to promote, for example, the implementation of the United Nations Environment Assembly resolution on sustainable infrastructure. So in that regard, for example, what I can say that infrastructure alone accounts for 79% of the global greenhouse gas emissions, and it counts for 88% of the adaptation cost. And then on the other side of the coin, literally, we know also from World Bank that every dollar spent on sustainable and resilient infrastructure can generate $4 of return. So this type of facts and figures we can produce, even if it's not comprehensive calculations on everything, but some of the data is available. Thanks.
Thank you. But maybe just add on that. So it's often based on basically large-scale multi-sectoral economic models like general equilibrium models and similar type of estimates, where you calculate the cost of needed reduction in climate and what kind of investments you need to put in based on how much infrastructure cost, how much removing fossil fuel subsidies cost, and those things. So we do similar work on how much it costs to achieve SDG 1 and 2. And it's basically a similar package of interventions that can lead to that goal. And as Suren mentioned, that's a very interesting point, that not all these investments would be directly labeled as green. They are somehow somewhere in between, but it kind of helps you get to the goal. For example, a lot of the fertilizer subsidies, pest management, and all things in agriculture is often part of these interventions when they are costed, but they are not necessarily be truly green. And that's something also to kind of think about when we think about the transition between green and brown that Suren also mentioned. And yes, so this then is able to calculate, let's say, for our work on SDG 1 and 2, it would require doubling public finance and doubling donor allocations to be achieved, these two SDGs. And similarly, you can do it for other SDGs. This is just on the side on the modeling. So now, do we still have a question, Darren, that you think we need to discuss, or you want like to go to the poll?
I think we're going to just move right to our panel session now. And just thank you, Marika, for that intervention. And yes, indeed, the business case for disaster risk reduction, adaptation, and mitigation to reduce hazards is really quite an obvious and solid number in terms of the incentive for these types of investments. So thank Daniel and Suren for really setting the stage on the approaches and tools that are out there for sustainable finance. I thought that was just an excellent dive into the array of instruments and mechanisms out there. Now we're switching gears to sort of now have a similar conversation and hear from experiences from across the region. And we have a number of excellent panelists, and I'm going to turn the floor back over to Daniel now to, I guess, to introduce, I guess, the experts across the UN system that we do have on hand to share some more experiences. And I just want to encourage participants too, before I hand over the floor to Daniel, that the Padlet discussion board, these good examples, as you're starting to think of these examples in your context or even the challenges, do paste those onto the discussion board. The link was in the chat space and we'll put it back in there, including Suren. I don't know if you have a chance to go on the Padlet page and put that, perhaps if there's a link to the French example and the tagging, that would be quite interesting for participants. And Livia too, thanks for highlighting just the complexities of the tagging process when you do have issues that sort of cut across taxonomies and categories. So that's obviously part of the picture. So Suren, over to you to start on an excellent discussion with our panelists. And I encourage our panelists now to turn on their cameras, and then you'll be able to kind of turn your mic on as Daniel sort of is able to give you the floor and proceeds with the discussion. Over to you, Daniel.
Thank you very much. So I think we are happy to count with very esteemed colleagues, speakers today. So first, we're going to hear from Lilian Kandikian. So apologies, first of all, if I don't pronounce the names correctly, who is a Partnerships and Development Finance Officer at the UN Resident Coordinator Office in North Macedonia. Then, keeping, let's say, with the Southeastern Europe region, Balkans, we're going to hear from Milan Lakicevic and Jarko Petrovic from UNDP Serbia. They're going to explain a bit more about what has been their work there, including with green bonds and other issues. We're going to turn to the UN RCO in Azerbaijan, so with Shamsia Mustafayeva, that is going also to explain as well how we have collaborated, I believe, also with UNEP-FI in the country. And then finally, Mercedes Freña from UNEP Latin America office will explain what has been the work in expanded taxonomies in the region, which I think could be interesting as an example in terms of a regional approach to that without being a European approach. So Lilian, please, over to you.
Thank you, Daniel. Hello to everyone on the workshop and in the panel. It's a pleasure to be with you today. So at the beginning, may I ask permission? I have a few slides to share to just augment my presentation, but I'm getting the message who's displayed participant screen sharing. Disabled, sorry. So
you should have access now, Lilian.
Okay, thank you, Darren. Okay. Do you see that well? Before I start?
Yes, we do.
Thank you. Okay, so what I will try to do today is summarize a bit what our country team has been working on in terms of sustainable finance and I will focus a bit more on the private finance aspect. But at the beginning, just to intro overall. So our team, probably similar to other UNCT teams, has a lot of in-depth activities on public finance through the entity work. So we work on gender responsive budgeting. For example, UN Women is engaged on that, climate budgeting, as well as tax policy and transfer pricing, and also some improvements in the system of municipal funding through UNDP, and then illicit financial flows through UNODC. And then on the other side, on the private finance side, to highlight, we are in the final preparations for starting the green financing facility, which I will talk a bit more about. It's a joint project of UNDP, IOM, UNECE with support of UNRCO. And we've also done a few kind of analytical piece of work and awareness piece of work, which was the analytical piece of work is the SDG financing landscape analysis, and the awareness raising and partnership building piece. It's mostly trainings for private sector and reaching out to regulators of financial industry, as well as to IFIs and international partners that work on sustainable finance or ESG. And I put at the bottom also a national conference, which I will also touch on, that was covering both aspects, sustainable public finance and sustainable private sector. And to give you just a bit of a context on our country context. So in our country context, being a EU accession or right now EU negotiation country, we are actually, we see that there was not so much interest or also capacity because of the devotion to the EU accession process to the INFF process. So we have actually not run such a process. And also in terms of the finance market, there are some initial movements towards sustainable financing, but overall throughout the finance sector and as well through private sector, there is not much awareness about ESG and sustainable finance as such. So within this context, we focused a bit on awareness raising. As I mentioned, we did a national conference on SDG financing, on which we invited high-level panelists to speak. So basically the champions in our country so far in terms of the sustainable finance aspect. So we had a panel on public finance, which was touching on various topics from climate finance to disaster risk reduction financing, and the overall kind of landscape of public finance and how it can be improved. We had the Minister of Finance, Minister of Environment on the panel, and then the UNDP resident representative and the World Bank representative. And then what you see here on the picture is the second panel, which was on private sector sustainable finance, or private sustainable finance, apologies. So we had there the governor, the CEO of one of the largest banks, Sparkasse, in the country, that is signatory to the responsible finance principles. And we had also the ANISAR expert on sustainable financial reporting, as well as Daniel from UNEP-FI, who's with us today at the panel to kind of build some awareness in the market on these aspects. Beyond that, we've done a bit of work, kind of very pilot work on how to strengthen sustainable financial reporting with companies and how to raise their awareness through trainings of what sustainable business, ESG, sustainable reporting really means. And we've tried this, but for now we're at a small scale. We've done just a few initial activities, basically improve the sustainable reporting of one larger company and worked with the chamber to do a training. So this would be that. In terms of practical aspects, we come to the green financing facility. This is an instrument that our UN country team, or more specifically UNDP, IOM, and UNECE with the support of RCO, developed as basically a blended finance instrument that should bring about 46 million through the banks in the country to SMEs and households to invest in renewable energy and energy efficiency solutions. We got financing for this already from the joint SDG fund on the SDG financing call, about $8 million US, and we have commitments from EBRD and 8 local banks as well as government for co-financing that we are in the final stages of working on the contracts to establish their co-financing and start delivering this instrument hopefully in the next month. So that's what I had in a nutshell. I don't know if you would have more questions, but in general, our approach has been, and it will continue, I think, in the next year to be on the private sustainable finance side to really see how to engage more systemically with the regulators. So what I mean there is the National Bank as the regulator of the banking system, but then also the Insurance Supervision Commission, the Pension Supervision Commission, to try to promote with them ESG aspects and responsible finance aspects so that they incorporate them, because without these incentives from the financial market in which financiers ask that companies invest or show more results on sustainable finance and sustainable parameters, we don't see how the companies will really see a pragmatic incentive to move towards sustainability in general. So this is one aspect we're looking at probably to investigate, and the other aspect is also to increase partnerships around this, because our assessment so far, but we might be very early on to put like a final judgment, is that within the UN family we do have some non-resident capacity, a very strong one. For example, UNEP-FI is the holder or the expertise on the responsible finance, responsible insurance principles, etc. But in the country team, we don't actually have much engagement on sustainable private finance. And also we've been in touch with UN Global Compact, and there, because of the not so active chapter we have, we also see there's global expertise, but at the country level, we are still not able to engage it in a way to maximize the use of its expertise. So what we're trying to do is see these global resources, but also regional and local resources. For example, we were discussing with IFC what they're doing. We are discussing with World Bank, EBRD, and to see how to pair, to combine forces to promote these topics, because for now they're a bit dormant on our market. So this is where we stand. Thank you.
Thank you, Lilian, and thank you also for sharing all of these different elements. I will turn now to Milan and Sarko, that I believe also they will provide us insights on how some of these technical capabilities as well can be rolled out. So I don't know who will start. Probably Milan, please.
Yes, I will start. Thank you very much, Daniel. My name is Žarko Petrović. I'm the team leader in Resilient Development in UNDP Serbia, and Milan Lakićević also will present himself in a bit. I will speak a little bit about leveraging private finance, and Milan will speak about aligning of finance for the achievement of sustainable development goals. And in line with what Suren has explained as a UNDP offer, we've been working for a number of years on unlocking private capital and aligning business operations for achieving of the sustainable development goals. We've been doing that by engaging the private sector, those who have business models that need to be upscaled, replicated, and engaged in new lines of business, but also new businesses, new startups, new companies that have a green business idea. And we've been working with them to make them bankable. In particular, with companies that work on circular economy. So basically using, most of the time using waste as a resources, then on renewable energy efficiency, inclusion of digital technologies and optimizing business processes and business costs. As a result, after some 7 years of work in this area, we've been able to leverage with $5 million invested approximately, these are ballpark numbers, easier to remember, 5 million invested, approximately 40 million over the past 6 or 7 years of private investment, or basically company invested. Some of them are mixed ownership. And this is the kind of first lesson learned that I would like to share about unlocking private capital and aligning business processes. We've seen that in the area of renewable energy efficiency, the leveraging ratio we can achieve in a country like Serbia is approximately 1 to 10, 1 to 15. In smaller areas, in less bankable areas, such as circular economies, our leveraging ratio is 1 to 5. So this is the kind of first lesson that I would like to share and contribute to the thinking about the achievement of leveraging ratios for engaging private sector and private capital. We basically use innovation as a vehicle to achieve engagement of business in the green area, in green transition, green transformation, and all of the things that also SDGs, but also in the Western Balkans, as the green agenda for the Western Balkans brings us. We try to speak business language, and this is maybe the second lesson learned that I would like to share. And speaking this business language is very important for engaging them in the first place. We started back in the day with interviews, with studies, with assessing the gaps, pitfalls, and challenges. And right now we're trying to work and develop a guarantee, or at least mobilize other people guarantees to make sure that the winners on our various calls for private sector can benefit from them. So speaking this business language is really a lesson learned that I would like to share on this call. We've basically succeeded in things that are obviously bankable, and we did not succeed in areas where a larger concessionality of free money or grant money is needed. This speaks a lot about the very nascent phase where we are in unlocking private capital and bringing in private sector in achieving the SDGs. So there is still a large room, a large need for public finances, in areas such as nature protection, biodiversity, and others. We will be able, and this becomes increasingly easy to mobilize and leverage money in circular economy projects, in projects of the private sector, in renewable energy efficiency, digitalization, things that have a clear and obvious business case where we just demonstrate bankability and also greenness of such projects. Things get more difficult in other areas that are not less important for the green transition and transformation. We are continuing with this because we've generated interest and mobilized interest in both the grant free money providers, but also the IFIs. So we are now scaling it and have a pipeline of over 74 million investment values, where our leveraging ratio is again on the ballpark number 1 to 5, where 12.8 million should mobilize approximately 60 million of IFI money. We did bring in IFIs along with the commercial banks. IFIs are more interested because IFI have this corporate demand. This corporate demand of the commercial banks still not as expressed and expressive and kind of demonstrated as the IFIs are. We brought in the IB, we're bringing on KfW and other companies. And this is also bring me to the third lesson learned from our past experiences. Speaking IFI language as well, seeing what is it that they want. We found it very, very difficult to engage an IFI or a bank if we preach or if we speak from a high horse. That simply did not work for us. We needed to engage, we need to understand what is it that they want and try to achieve incremental improvements of their goals and businesses. So far is working, and hopefully the next IBC I'll be able to share more on the successes of this new pipeline that is coming up. And I would like to hand over now to my colleague Milan for his part. Thank you.
Thank you. Hello, my name is Milan Akicevic. I'm sustainable financing specialist at UNDP Serbia. And just to explain, one of the ways that UNDP is unlocking private capital and aligning business operations for SDGs to Serbia are actually these challenge funds. By leveraging private capital with donor funds, these public and private companies, mostly SMEs in Serbia, that either went through or are currently going through this accelerator program, play a really important role in green transformation. And UNDP is here to help them with basically four things: directing their innovative capacity toward green, assisting them to prepare business plan and bankable business proposals, providing access to finance, and introducing and embedding impact measurement mechanisms into their operations. But besides working around the private capital, we are also working on other elements of SDG finance equation, basically public finance and alignment of public capital expenditures with green transformation. Basically, the government of the Republic of Serbia successfully issued its first sovereign green bonds just 1 year ago in September 2021. And I dare to say successful since this issuance raised 1 billion euros on the international market with 7 years of maturity, with annual coupon rate of 1%, which, if I may quote, National Bank of Serbia was the lowest annual coupon rate ever for the Republic of Serbia, and deal rate of 1.26%, while the issue itself was oversubscribed by more than 3 times. I mean, even the Ministry of Finance stated that raised sum was 3 times higher than the government initially expected. The Ministry of Finance partnered with the investment bank, which guided and assisted them during the preparation phases. And all preparatory work lasted for 3 months. Basically, during that time, green bond framework was prepared. It got reviewed and approved by independent external reviewer. And both of these documents were officially published on the Ministry of Finance / Public Debt Administration website. And finally, the bonds were issued. And as stipulated by the Serbian Green Bond Framework, proceeds of issued green bonds will be used to finance or refinance new and existing expenditures, while eligible green expenditures may include capital expenditures, operational expenditures, tax expenditures, and transfers. And all of these are aimed to promote Serbia's transition to low carbon, climate resilient, and ecological economy, as well as contributing to the UN SDGs. But in order to be eligible, these expenditures must still be at least one of the, you need to be from at least one of the following categories. These are renewable energy, energy efficiency, transport, sustainable water waste management, pollution prevention, circular economy, and last but not the least, protection of the environment and biodiversity and sustainable agriculture. So framework also allows that the green expenditure portfolio may include expenditures made within the 3 budget years preceding the year of issuance, as well as those made in the same year as the issuance and or future budget expenditures. But having in mind that the government, the Ministry of Finance had the investment bank assistance during preparatory phases, UNDP Serbia decided to provide assistance during the monitoring and reporting stages of green bond journey. Thus, we are currently working with the Ministry of Finance and the other relevant line ministries on impact assessment and first impact report, as well as on allocation report. And our current work on impact assessment will cover infrastructure projects that were or are financed or refinanced with these funds up until September 2022. And I would also like to add that many of these projects, especially from the water waste management portfolio, were actually prepared with the technical assistance and support of UNDP Serbia's tech cell. This is our cell that is consistent of engineers, which offers technical support to the government and line ministries in terms of project preparation, which is another way that we are utilizing our own resources to help our government partners to align infrastructure investments with the SDGs. Also, the disengagement, as we see it, allow us to monitor the use of proceeds, to measure impact, but also it puts us in very good position to open different important subjects for discussion, such as introduction of various budget tagging mechanisms. I will just briefly reflect that UNDP Serbia did climate financing study in Serbia back in 2020, which demonstrated actually that Serbia would hugely benefit of introducing climate budget tagging mechanisms with the current classification scheme that would facilitate identification of climate expenditures across the entire public sector. But also it allows us working on the green bond impact assessment also allows us to be in front of infrastructure development in the country, which could hopefully unlock and mobilize further investments in green transformation, not just in the sense of additional public investment, but also in the sense of private sector and private capital. Thus, we see this work as very important. And I would like to conclude by saying that we already saw many examples in other countries that successful implementation of debt instruments such as thematic bonds can usually lead to the repeated issuance if the fiscal space allows it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think that was very interesting as well to hear, what has been the key elements that have been done, let's say, with a specific approach in the country. So I see that we still have 2 more speakers and some time to go. So Shams, please over to you. And if I could ask everybody to please stick to the 7 minutes, it would be great. Thank you.
Absolutely. Can you hear me well?
Yes. Can you talk again?
Is this better? Can you hear me better?
Yeah.
Oh,
yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. So as Daniel said, my name is Shams Mustafa. I'm from the RCO Azerbaijan. So I'm gonna, because we have RCO, colleagues here as well, I just wanted to talk a bit more about the process and how do we work with private sector and banks, and we're trying to engage in general private sector to promote sustainable business practices in Azerbaijan. And I'm not saying that this is not happening before us. I'm sure there was lots of things happening, and the more I talk to the private sector, the more I find out. In most of the cases, I find that they're much ahead of us as UN, but still it's, so what we have been doing, so we started basically with promotion of the UN Global Compact, because that was an easy conversation to have. At some point, I realized that as a partnership officer, I go to the banks. First of all, as previous speaker said, I don't speak their language, I speak the UN language. And number 2, I don't really have much to offer for them, to incentivize them to talk to me about the sustainable corporate practices. So it felt like UN Global Compact is an easy, straightforward way of engaging, businesses, to talk about sustainable business practices. So that's how we started. I have to say it hasn't been easy. It was a huge uphill struggle because, as I said again, so you have to, maybe I should also highlight this, that if you're working in an environment where there's not strong government regulations, like the ones that you're promoting in EU, and there's no demand from customers for sustainable business practices, really businesses don't have much pressure or much incentives to apply these practices or to learn more about them. And some businesses, again, are far ahead of us. I'm not saying all businesses, but when we talk about the small businesses or small and medium businesses or local businesses, they don't have international component to it. It's really hard to incentivize them. So that's why UN Global Compact has been a simple place, but it wasn't, even that wasn't easy to promote in Azerbaijan. But we have, I think we kind of we have managed, and finally, Azerbaijan has been chosen as one of the pilot countries in the region. To kind of they finally, hired a staff member, actually a manager, UN Global Content Manager for Azerbaijan, who is helping me a lot. We work together. He works very closely with our office. He's actually based in RCO, which is not a usual practice, but because I've been so engaged into this process that he's working very closely with me, we have some traction now. And so I think we have more and more businesses signing up. But coming to how did we end up working with this particular initiative is that, so once we started talking to the businesses, we realized that, again, we don't have much incentives. So, and then we decided that what are the institutions that's working with the private sector that have the incentives? And then we ended up with SME agency, SME support agency for Azerbaijan, and Entrepreneurship Development Fund for Azerbaijan. We realized that they have incentives. The fund has financial incentives through banks, and the SME agency has lots of other support system in place that can incentivize and can promote sustainable business practices. So RCO has signed an agreement, like an MOU or DOI, as whatever you want to call it, that we will, together with them, promote sustainable business practices. And that's where we started getting some traction with the businesses. And through them, we have been able to do more, much more than we were doing as on our own. So when we were talking to the SME agency, they're very good at the UN Global Compact is enough. They actually decided to choose two elements, environmental and labor rights, and just focus on those two, promoting on those two principles right now, which I think is good that they're understanding that they're doing reasonable, like targets and working towards it. And we are helping them, supporting them in this for sure. But then when we talked to the fund actually was more interested in ESG. And they said, well, this is very good, but we would rather focus on ESG standards. We want to do more on banking sector, on something that's relevant to the banking sector. And some banks are, as I said, are already ahead of us. So that's how we ended up talking to our UNEP colleagues. Actually, we were lucky that Daniel was coming to Baku. So we have started doing side meetings, which I learned now, I noted, do lots of side meetings, especially if it's non-resident agencies. Since like with those, we get much more interest in having non-resident agencies come and talk in the conference and leave. So as one point I have noted down. So that's how we ended up having a conversation with the fund, and then this kind of one conversation led to another conversation, and we had a webinar actually with about 20 Azerbaijani banks, because the partners were Bank Association of Azerbaijan and the EDF, what we call International Development Fund. And so that webinar also, I felt like there was a lot of interest from the bank. There was lots of questions, and one good practice that I learned out of that too, we had, UNEP had the Turkish bank actually to talk. And because the language and culture is so similar, and Yapı Kredi is really the leading Turkish bank, I think there was lots of interest to that. And I felt like banks, I think we opened more or less, not for all the banks, but some of them in new horizons. And I'm really looking forward to working with you, team on this. And we're hoping that we can achieve more. But, and again, I hope I didn't give the impression that that's the only thing that's happening in the country. There's much more, I'm sure it's happening, but that's how we approach it as an RCO. And we have, and we had a lot of lessons learned through that, what is the right way and how do we talk to the banks or business, private sector in general. So I'll stop here if there are any questions, but basically we don't have a huge experience. We have some experience. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Shams. I think that was indeed very, very concise and concrete in terms of the private sector engagement, which I think is like, an area of interest in terms of the next steps. No, that's critical. So last but not least, Mercedes, please go ahead.
Thanks, Daniel, and thanks to all the organizers for the invitation to participate in this webinar. Well, I'm Mercedes García Fariña, Program Management Officer for Climate Finance at UNEP's Latin America and the Caribbean office. I'm going to share with you the initiative of the Working Group on Sustainable Finance Taxonomies in Latin America and the Caribbean. However, firstly, I would like to share with you a bit of the context context to frame why and how this initiative was born. During the last session of the Forum of Ministers of Environment of LAC, ministers adopted the Bridgetown Declaration, which sets the environmental agenda for the region. And specifically under this declaration, the ministers emphasized the need to promote synergies with ministers of finance, financial regulators, and supervisors to jointly develop the appropriate framework to steer capital flows into an environmentally sustainable direction, recognizing that sustainable finance has a key role, of course, to play in the LAC green transition. So as we all here are aware of, public finance is not going to give the scale that is needed to bridge the financing gap to meet climate change, biodiversity, and land degradation targets. Therefore, the private sector, specifically the financial sector through global financial markets, has the potential to bridge the sustainability gap. So the question here is, how do we contribute to mobilize the trillions of financial assets that are currently managed worldwide by asset managers, institutional investors, banks, among others. So, and well, scaling up sustainable finance, not only in the Latin America and Caribbean region, but also worldwide, is a challenging task. For which market guidance is completely necessary. So with the aim of providing the required market guidance, as Daniel showed in his presentation before, more and more governments around the world, inspired mostly by the European Union's sustainable finance taxonomy, have developed or are seeking to develop clear definitions of what is green and what is not. And the LAC region is not an exception. There are a growing number of initiatives across the region that are currently developing sustainable taxonomies based on different national climate and environmental objectives. Colombia is currently the only country in the region that has just published and adopted its taxonomy. However, there are already 15 countries in the region out of a total of 33 countries that are in the process of developing their national sustainable finance taxonomy. Diversifying sustainable taxonomies across the region would increase information asymmetry and market fragmentation, which are among the main barriers to be overcome for increasing market uptake on sustainable finance. It's important to highlight that the financial sector is the most standardized sector in the world and requires well-founded, clear, and harmonized standards about what can be recognized as a green activity. So all the environmentally sustainable classification systems developed or that are currently developed across the region are in an incipient stage of definition. Therefore, undoubtedly, there is a growing momentum and a great opportunity for the LAC countries to establish compatible and operable frameworks on sustainable finance, not only at regional level, but also globally, for example, with the EU taxonomy, that will facilitate access to cross-border financial markets for such investments. So considering this context and in response to the ministerial request by the Ministers of Environment of the region, UNEP, as a secretariat of the forum, constituted in December 2021 the Working Group on Sustainable Finance Taxonomy in Latin America and the Caribbean. The LAC Taxonomy Working Group was created as part of the interagency technical committee of the Forum of Ministers of Environment of LAC. It's led by UNEP and is constituted by ECLAC, UNDP, World Bank Group, IMF, the IDB, CAF, and FAO. The LAC Taxonomy Working Group has also the participation of the European Commission, particularly DG IMPA through the Sustainable Finance Policy Unit, and also DG FISMA as an external technical advisor. And we just, last year, we just agreed on a work plan for 2022-2023. In this first year, the LAC Taxonomy Working Group will map the landscape of international and regional sustainable finance taxonomy that have been developed or are currently under development. And this analysis will assess in a granular way the differences and also the points in common between sustainable finance taxonomy, not only in LAC, but also globally. These commonalities will provide a basis for the developing of a common ground of sustainable finance taxonomy, specifically for the LAC region, that at the same time reflects the different national circumstances of the member states of the LAC region. So this common framework of sustainable finance taxonomy for the LAC region will be focuses in a first phase on climate change activities, and in a subsequent phase we will increase the scope to other environmental and social objectives. The idea is that this common ground, this common framework will serve as a guide for the development and harmonization of national taxonomy, specifically for the LAC region. So our plan, I'm going to get into some details. Our plan is to have a first draft of the common framework by the end of this month. During the months of October, November, we will be in the public consultation processes to review the common ground, but several regional stakeholders, such as Ministry of Environment, of course, but also Ministry of Finance, financial supervisors and regulators, such as central banks and superintendencies for the banking and insurance sector, and the private financial sector, also banks, insurance, investors, and so on. No? So we estimate that by Q1 2023, we will have published the common ground for Latin America. And also for the next year, in addition to increasing the scope to other environmental and social objectives, we are going to implement pilots in countries using the common ground framework in the national sustainable finance taxonomy development process. So specifically, we are going to develop as a group several technical assistants, specifically in 8 LAC countries, whose main components will be develop, of course, the national taxonomy on sustainable finance and tested across the banking sector. Provide recommendation as a second component, provide recommendation for financial regulators and supervisors to implement and update the taxonomy, specifically for the banking and insurance sectors, and also to develop the governance and mechanism for the taxonomy implementation and update. And finally, we are going to design and deliver capacity building, capacity training within financial institutions on the implementation of the national sustainable finance taxonomy. I'm gonna stop here because it's a lot of information and to give a space for questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mercedes, and thank you all. I think we had a very interesting input from different parts of the world, even let's say beyond Europe. I think that's very, very critical. And it's great to see, you know, we have like countries in the Southeast Europe region that have already quite advanced approaches. They have integrated these elements. We also have incipient approaches in terms of the the Caucasus, with Azerbaijan, that they were integrating as well with the private sector, the discussions with the public sector. And then finally, say with Latin America, there is more of a regional approach to showcase that actually a regional approach to sustainable finance can also be done. And it is not only something that the EU can do, it's something that can also be done in other different contexts. So I will hand over to Livia for the next steps on the Q&A. So thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you all, especially to the panelists and Daniel for moderating. I think it was very exciting to see real examples from real places. If there is one quick question, because we are just in the end of our event and we don't want to take your time as well as our participant time. So if there is one quick burning question, please feel free to ask. You can also unmute yourself. On the meantime, the notes will be compiled, the information from the panel, the recording will be available, and also the notes that you put on Padlet will be summarized. So you can see all the links, as well as the Padlet will remain open, so you can still add your notes. So we are just in the hour, so one more quick question. Okay, so maybe we are ready to finish. So I will just thank you again on behalf of IISD, and I hand over to IBC for the closing remarks.
Thank you, Livia. Indeed, we probably exhausted the participants with this flood of information, but I do hope people found it useful, and I want to thank everyone for having stayed with us these 2 hours. As it was highlighted, this region is really at the forefront of green transition and actually gaining more momentum under the Green Deal with the new taxonomy, etc. So as we've highlighted already, more coordinated action is really urgently needed to accelerate this transition and to scale up the investment. I'd like to particularly highlight the importance of the public and private action and the partnerships among them. And with this training, we of course wanted to give you the information, and now we obviously encourage you to use this guidance and further spread the information that you have received here. Us as UNEP, our partner UNDP, and the whole IBC will be available to support you as we move forward. We're available in case you need more support in informing, engaging, and convincing the different partners at the country level. So thank you again for your active participation. Special thanks to all the speakers. Thank you for IISD for the facilitation, and thank you for my colleagues of IBC for the backup support and the preparations for this webinar. As Livia said, the discussion board will remain open for a few days, so you can continue to exchange there. And we'd also be very happy to receive your feedback on how well this workshop met your expectations. So we'll take the lessons learned on board as we move forward with this green transition webinar series, and we prepare for the upcoming events on other topics related to green transition. So, and finally, thank you for all your continued support to the issue-based coalition, and I hope to see you in the future again. Thank you.